The city of Aurelia stood proudly on the edge of the world, cradled by obsidian cliffs and surrounded by winds that howled like ancient gods. Its towers, carved from black stone and crowned with silver spires, shimmered in the stormlight like the remnants of a forgotten age. For centuries, the city had defied time. Empires fell and rose again beyond its borders, yet Virelia endured, unchanged, unmoved, unbending. Within its shadowed halls, life pulsed with a quiet arrogance. The people believed in their invincibility. They had no kings, only the Council of Nine, a circle of elder scholars, tacticians, and judges who ruled with calm precision. Among them, Chancellor Edric stood tallest, his voice smooth and sharp as glass. He believed logic was the last true god, and Virelia its final temple. Edric had never tolerated superstition. When word first came from the northern wastelands, rumors of trembling earth and vanishing villages, he dismissed it as hysteria. And when the nomad woman arrived at the city gates, tattered and rain-soaked, he almost refused to see her at all. She called herself Kale. Her eyes were the color of scorched metal, and her voice carried the weight of long distances and unbearable memories. "It's coming," she said. "You don't see it yet, but it's beneath you, listening, learning." In the council chamber, her words echoed too long. Edric let the silence speak before answering. "We've heard these stories before. The sky cracks, the ground trembles, and the frightened weave myths to give it form. Virelia has stood for generations. Whatever stalks the wilderness ends at our walls." Kale didn't argue. She simply looked out the tall windows toward the storm-churned horizon. "The ones who said that before you," she murmured, "are all bones now." The council allowed her to stay one night. By morning, she was gone. Only one member of the council had watched her leave, Thalen, the youngest and newest voice. He lingered at the edge of tradition like ivy on old stone, curious and slow to harden. He watched her vanish into the mist and felt something cold settle inside him, something he couldn't explain. In the days that followed, nothing visibly changed. The wind still tore across the cliffs. The forges still sang their molten songs. The bells of the clock spires still marked the passing hours with mechanical certainty. But underneath, things began to shift. Miners from the eastern tunnels reported sounds that did not belong, low groans, like breath through a dying throat. Animals began to behave strangely, herds fleeing before dawn, birds vanishing from the skies. The river Torin, which had run pure for centuries, turned black for a day and then cleared as if nothing had happened. Thalen brought these reports to the council, his voice quiet but steady. "It's not just coincidence. Something is changing." Edric folded his hands. "Coincidence is the shape of life. It is not proof." "You once said data matters above all," Thalen replied. "What if we're ignoring the pattern because we don't want to see where it leads?" The room chilled. Edric stood slowly. "What I will not tolerate," he said, "is fear dressed as foresight." Wordlessly, Thalen left the chamber. He didn't return the next day. Instead, he walked the lower quarters of the city, the parts the council rarely discussed, where machines coughed and smog coiled in alleys. The workers there spoke in whispers now. They told stories of people going missing from their beds, of metal that warped overnight, of shadows moving against the wind. He found Kale again 3 nights later in an abandoned clockmaker's shop, her hands wrapped around a mug of bitter tea. "You knew they wouldn't listen," he said. "They never do," she replied. "Warnings aren't meant to be comfortable. They're meant to be loud. Ugly." Thalen sat across from her. "Then make me understand. I want to know what we're facing." She studied him for a long time, as though trying to decide if he could bear the truth. "It's not a thing you can kill," she said finally. "Not a monster or a god. It's older. A hunger that listens through stone. That waits. And when it rises, it doesn't conquer, it empties." He swallowed. "Why Virelia?" She looked toward the heart of the city. "Because it's proud. Because it believes it cannot fall. And because nothing feeds the dark like certainty." The air grew colder, as though the city itself had heard her. In the distance, thunder rolled, not in the sky, but beneath the earth. The next morning, the council declared a festival, a celebration of Aurelia's 700th year. Music filled the streets. Fireworks split the sky in colors. And beneath it all, the stone continued to breathe. Kale was gone again. Thalen didn't look for her this time. He turned inward, into the records buried beneath the great archive. He found diagrams of the city's foundations, old reports of minor collapses buried under bureaucratic silence, maps that didn't match the terrain anymore. He found warnings, some centuries old, all ignored. And then he found a drawing, a crude sketch etched in charcoal, depicting a twisted shape coiled beneath a spired city. The text below had been scratched out, but 3 words remained. It watches still, that night, as lightning shattered the horizon and wind clawed the walls. Thalen returned to the council. He stood alone in the great chamber, rain dripping from his cloak. "We're standing on something," he said. "Not just earth. A wound, and it's waking." Edric, flanked by the others, simply stared at him. "Do you hear yourself?" he said. "You sound like her, like a frightened child." Thalen stepped forward. "If you're right and I'm wrong, then we've lost nothing by preparing. But if I'm right and we wait, then it's already too late." The council didn't answer. The silence this time was colder. Outside, the bells rang midnight, and deep below, something moved. The wind that night was sharper than before, as if the city itself had begun to exhale. Somewhere in the distance, a tower cracked, and nobody noticed. The city of Aurelia still stood, proud, untouched. For now, the sun rose over Aurelia with unnatural calm, casting golden light on a city already beginning to fray. From the highest tower to the darkest alley, the silence was different now, strained, like something holding its breath. Few noticed the change, and fewer spoke of it aloud. The council had declared the previous night's storms a seasonal anomaly, a disruption to be studied and forgotten. The people, lulled by tradition and comfort, chose to believe them. But below the surface, the cracks deepened, both in the stone and in the minds of those who had begun to see the truth. Thalen no longer attended council meetings. He spent his days in the lower vaults of the great archive, and his nights walking the city, observing, listening. He began to map reports, unexplained sinkholes in the northern quarter, statues shifting positions without human hands, and in the old district near the observatory, a house that had collapsed in on itself, leaving nothing behind but scorched grass and silence. At first, he tried to reason with the council again, bringing fragments of stone from the site, brittle and humming faintly with heat. Edric barely glanced at them. "Urban decay," he said flatly. "You think no city ages?" "They're hollow inside," Thalen replied. "Not just broken, eaten." Edric's gaze sharpened. "You've spent too much time with that woman. You allowed her stories to rot your logic." "She's not wrong," Thalen said. "You just won't listen. And you are not permitted," Edric snapped, "to bring panic into this chamber." With that, the door was closed on him for good. The following week, the storms returned. No lightning this time, just thunder without cause, low and persistent, as if the ground itself groaned in protest. The people noticed now. Murmurs spread faster than fire. Streets emptied earlier. Guards were doubled. Still, the council held their silence, insisting that fear was a greater enemy than nature. A new face began to appear among the citizens. Alira, an engineer from the storm forges, brilliant and precise, with hands stained by grease and soot. She had once designed the magnetic domes that protected Verelia's towers from lightning strikes. She had never believed in ghosts or curses, until the ground opened beneath her workshop. No one was hurt, but the crater that remained was smooth and circular, as if carved by something deliberate. Machinery had vanished. Not crushed, gone. Thalen found her staring into the void, arms crossed over her chest. "You saw it too," he said gently. Alira didn't look at him. "I heard something before it happened, a sound like grinding teeth. Then silence. Then nothing. You believe me now?" "I believe something is wrong," she said, "but belief won't fix it." That night, they gathered in the ruined workshop, Thalen, Alira, and 5 others who had started asking the wrong questions in the wrong places. Scholars, mechanics, builders, not revolutionaries, but thinkers. They formed a circle in the fading light. Sketches and torn reports spread across the floor like offerings. Kale was among them again, emerging from the shadows like she'd never left. "They'll never change," she said quietly. "Not the council. Not until it's too late." "We don't need to convince them," Thalen replied. "We need to find a way to stop this ourselves." Elira shook her head. "We don't even know what this is. We have theories, warnings, scraps of information, but no name, no form." Kale's eyes narrowed. "You're looking for shape when you should be listening for pattern." "What does that mean?" Elira asked. Kale stepped forward, kneeling beside a sketch of the city's foundation. Her fingers traced the outer ring. "It's not about what it is. It's about what it does. It consumes what thinks itself immortal. That's the pattern." The room fell still. They began working in secret, gathering data, tracking vibrations, collecting anomalies. Elira created a device, a seismic listener attuned not just to tremors, but to frequencies that didn't match anything known. When they activated it beneath the city's oldest tower, the device emitted a low hum, and then screamed, shattering itself from inside. They replaced it with a sturdier one. This time, the readings revealed a heartbeat, slow, deep, below the city, beneath the stone, beneath the tunnels. Alive. Panic clutched Thalen's chest, but he held it back. They had proof now, even if it wasn't the kind that could win debates in marble halls. The council remained quiet. They had heard the rumors, of course. They had even sent guards to follow Thalen's group, but they never acknowledged the findings. To do so would be to admit error, to confess fear. That they could not allow. Edric stood in the central chamber one night, alone. He stared into the black stone walls, as if expecting them to answer his questions. Deep down, he had begun to doubt. Not because he believed Thalen, but because he had started to dream of things with no eyes watching him from cracks in the walls. He buried the fear, as he always had, beneath logic. It had served him all his life. Then the ground shook. It wasn't violent. It was worse. A subtle, sustained vibration, barely felt but impossible to ignore. It lasted less than a minute, just long enough to be noticed by everyone, long enough to suggest something had shifted. A wall in the south quarter split in half. A monument collapsed in the temple square. The river stopped flowing for 7 hours. Elira brought the latest readings to Thalen. Her face was pale. "It's rising." Kale stood beside her. "Then you have days. At most. Can we stop it?" Thalen asked. "No," she said, "but you can still get some people out. Maybe." The idea felt like defeat. Virelia had never been abandoned. To leave it behind was to surrender its soul, but to stay was worse. They began working on a plan, secretly coordinating with allies in the transportation sector, mapping exit routes, identifying structural weak points. But every step forward was hindered by time and by fear. The people were beginning to notice. They whispered more than ever, and fear, once rooted, grew fast and wild. Edric summoned Thalen at last. "You're organizing an exodus," he said without accusation. Thalen met his gaze. "I'm trying to save what I can. You're feeding hysteria. I'm responding to evidence." Edric turned toward the great window, where clouds rolled like ink. "If you're wrong and we scatter this city for nothing, history will remember us as cowards. And if I'm right, then there will be no one left to remember anything." Thalen said nothing. There was nothing left to argue. That night, Kale stood atop the old wall, staring into the distance. Thunder pulsed on the horizon again, but there were no clouds, just black sky and a single shuddering tremor in the air. "They won't leave," she said. "Not in time." "We'll make them," Thalen replied. "We'll find a way." Kale didn't answer. Her silence said everything. Beneath them, the city glowed softly in the moonlight, still proud, still whole. But the wind had changed. It no longer smelled of rain. It smelled like ash. The first tower fell 3 days later. No warning, no thunderclap, just a sound like dry bones grinding together. And then the western spire, home to the ether scholars, bent in half as if bowed by invisible hands. The scream of steel and stone echoed for miles. Dust swallowed the sky, thick and gray like morning. And then came the silence again, heavier than ever. Thalen stood amid the wreckage before the echoes had fully faded. His face was streaked with soot, his coat torn by shards of crystal. He stepped over crushed tomes and shattered glass, searching for survivors but finding none. The tower had collapsed inward, as though pulled rather than pushed. Alira arrived minutes later, breathless, eyes wide with rage and fear. "This wasn't structural failure," she said, her voice shaking. "It was surgical." Kale knelt near the base of the ruins, her fingers brushing the blackened stone. "It's not devouring randomly anymore. It's targeting." "Why here?" Thalen whispered. "Because this tower held knowledge," she said. "Proof. Threats." That night, they met in the hollow of the old reservoir, a forgotten place beneath the city, far from prying eyes. A map of Aurelia lay on the stone table, red marks spreading across its surface like wounds. One by one, they connected the fallen structures, the observatory, the storm forges, now the scholar's spire. All were centers of discovery, innovation, challenge. "It's purging resistance," Alira muttered. "And we're next," said Jaren, the youngest of their group, his voice barely more than a whisper. Thalen nodded grimly. "We accelerate the evacuation. No more delays." They split into pairs, spreading through the city's districts to warn those who would listen. Their words were met with doubt, anger, sometimes open hostility. Many still clung to the illusion of safety, but some listened, enough to matter. Quietly, a trickle of people began to leave the city under cover of darkness. Whole families vanished from their homes without a trace. The council labeled it desertion. Thalen called it survival. Edric, now rarely seen in public, remained entombed in the council hall. Rumors said he had sealed the gates, surrounded himself with loyalists. Others claimed he had gone mad, speaking to shadows. Thalen didn't care. The council had made their choice. But the city had not. 3 nights after the tower fell, the tremors returned, longer this time, deeper, rattling windows and awakening ancient mechanisms in the walls. Fissures opened near the grand square. A statue of the first architect cracked across the chest and split in half. Flames erupted from the ground in places where no fuel burned. Kale arrived at Thalen's door without a word. He followed her to the southern wall, where a breach had formed. On the other side, the ground was sinking, not crumbling, but folding in slow spirals. Structures collapsed into themselves with eerie grace, consumed without sound. "It's accelerating," she said. "Whatever's beneath us is growing bolder." "We don't have time," Thalen replied. Back at their sanctuary, Alira unveiled her final creation, a device built to resonate with the frequencies they had recorded, the same frequencies that had shattered her earlier instruments. This one was designed not to listen, but to speak back. "I don't know what it will do," she said, "but if it hears us, maybe we can distract it, or buy time." Kale frowned. "Or make it angry." "We've already done that," Alira said. "The question is whether we let it finish or we fight." Thalen agreed to deploy the device, not as a solution, but a diversion. If it worked, it might confuse the thing long enough to get more people out. They placed it near the heart of the city, buried beneath the broken plaza, and activated it at dusk. Nothing happened at first. Then the air changed. The city seemed to hold its breath. A low, trembling hum rippled outward from the plaza like a pulse. Birds fled. Water rippled in fountains. Lanterns flickered. And the thing beneath the city paused. Just for a moment, the ground stopped shifting. The tremors eased. For the first time in weeks, the silence was not ominous. It was still. That night, hundreds more fled. But dawn brought retaliation. The central ward collapsed in one massive convulsion. Entire streets folded inward. Buildings imploded without flame. People screamed, scattered, vanished beneath falling stone. The thing had learned. It was no longer feeding. It was purging. Thalen's sanctuary became a triage center. The wounded were everywhere, dust-cloaked and wide-eyed. Children cried without tears. Alira's device had bought them time, but at a price. "We can't do this again," she said, her voice hoarse. "It knows now. It adapts." Kale stared into the fire, her expression unreadable. Then we give them one last chance. What do you mean? Thalen asked. We take the story public. All of it. No more secrets. No more caution. Let the people choose. It'll cause panic, Jaren said. It'll cause movement, Kale replied. That night, they hijacked the city's remaining signal towers. Thalen stood before a transmitter and spoke. He told the truth about the warnings, about the council's refusal, about what lay beneath the streets. It is not a storm, he said, voice steady. It is a judgment. We ignored the signs. We built our city atop a fault older than memory. And now it wakes. But you still have a choice. Leave now. Find the northern road. We'll hold the breach as long as we can. The broadcast reached every ear. By morning, thousands were moving. The council issued a final statement calling Thalen a traitor. But no one listened. In the chaos, Kale disappeared again. No one saw her leave. Elira feared the worst. But Thalen believed she'd gone to slow the collapse from within. She always had a way of finding where she was needed most. By the second night, fires dotted the city like stars. The streets were emptying. Even those who had mocked Thalen now fled. And still the ground pulsed, patient and relentless. Elira stood with Thalen on the eastern wall, watching the evacuation. It's not enough, she said. We started too late. It's more than we hoped for. She turned to him. And what about you? He smiled, wearied and hollow. I stay. Someone has to close the door behind us. Her eyes burned, but she said nothing. Below them, the city began to fracture again. This time not from beneath, but from within, as if the very idea of Aurelia had started to dissolve. And the storm at last returned, not of lightning, but of wind and dust and memory, as if the city itself wept. They had warned them. Now they were gone. Ash fell like snow. It drifted over broken spires of Aurelia, over the shattered arches and ruptured streets, over the bones of towers that once scraped the heavens. What had been a city of invention and defiance was now a graveyard of ambition. The silence no longer pressed. It merely lingered, a final breath held far too long. Thalen stood alone beneath the fractured dome of the central hall, once the city's heart. Wind hissed through the gaps in the ruined ceiling, carrying distant echoes of lives that had already vanished beyond the mountains. Around him, the last signals blinked out, beacons gone dim, messages unanswered. He clutched a book, the last remaining log of their efforts. Pages smeared with soot and ink. Elira's handwriting filled the margins, chaotic with equations and notes. Corrections scratched beside desperate hopes. He'd promised to deliver it north, to preserve something, anything, of what they had learned. But now his legs refused to move. The city wasn't ready to let him go. A voice stirred in the dark. Still here? Kale stepped to a fractured doorway, like a memory made flesh. Her cloak was torn, her boots scorched, but her eyes held the same fire Thalen remembered. I thought you were gone, he whispered. I was, she said, but I came back. Couldn't let you hold the line alone. He swallowed hard. Most of them made it. The northern road held. Elira got out. Kale nodded. Then it wasn't for nothing. They sat in the debris, two shadows in a place once alive with light. The weight of what had been lost threatened to crush even silence. And yet, beneath the ruin, there remained something stubborn. A pulse, a presence. Not the monstrous hunger they had felt before, but something slower now, fading. I think it's dying, Thalen said quietly. Kale raised a brow. The thing beneath? He nodded. We starved it, took away the minds it fed on, the ideas, the resistance. That's what it wanted, she murmured. Energy, tension, the friction between belief and denial. It needed a city that refused to learn, Thalen said. Once enough of us broke the pattern. Kale finished the thought. It lost its grip. For a long time, neither spoke. The sky above flickered with weak light, stars barely visible through the haze. Somewhere, distant thunder rolled, though there were no clouds. Just memory. We could leave, Kale said. There's still time. But Thalen shook his head. You know I can't. Not yet. Kale's eyes narrowed. You're not here to die, Thalen. No, he said. I'm here to bury what's left, and make sure it never wakes again. She stood slowly. Then I'll help. One last time. Together, they descended into the Undercity. The old tunnels had twisted beyond recognition, walls grown damp and strange, metal warped by unseen forces. At the center, where the stone pulsed like a sleeping heart, Alira's broken device lay in fragments. It had done its job. But now, a final blow was needed. Kale lit the core's edges with thermite charges, silent, precise. Thalen placed the book beneath a dry outcrop, sealed in copper, a time capsule no one might ever find. But it mattered. It mattered that the truth wasn't erased. As they climbed back toward the surface, Kale glanced at him. Do you think it'll remember? If it's still aware, yes, he said. And if not, the Earth will. They reached the plaza as the charges ignited. The explosion was soundless, like a breath held too long finally let go. The stone cracked, the foundation collapsed, and the Undercity folded in on itself. A controlled death, not of vengeance, but of closure. They stood together, watching the dust rise like smoke from an extinguished fire. At last, Kale turned to him. Now! Thalen looked once more at the city he had loved and fought for. The streets were broken, yes, but memory clung to them like ivy. Somewhere beneath the ruin was stillness. Not peace, but rest. He nodded. They left Virilia behind before dawn. The northern road was long and rough, threaded through mountains carved by older storms. Along the way, they found the refugees, those who had once mocked them, now rebuilding in scattered camps. They welcomed Kale and Thalen not as leaders, but as kin, survivors, witnesses. Alira greeted them with tears and an embrace tight enough to bruise. We made it, she whispered. Some of us, Thalen replied. They stayed in the settlement for weeks, helped build, wrote everything they remembered. Kale rarely spoke of the city again, but Thalen saw her gaze drift south at night, as if listening for something she could no longer hear. One evening, a child brought him a drawing, a crude sketch of a tower crumbling, with roots curling beneath it. What is this? He asked. It's a story my grandmother told me, the boy said proudly, about a city that sank itself to save the world. Thalen smiled. Good story, he said, and walked outside to watch the stars return.